Thank you. I would like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land which we are meeting. I acknowledge and pay respects to their elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge Mr. Hedley Davis, President MBA, and my thanks to Danita and the Master Builders Board for the opportunity to address the summit, of which Cbus is a proud sponsor. I also want to acknowledge the importance of the Cbus relationship with the MBA and its members, and thank the MBA for their invaluable contribution, representing 50% of our board. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of context. The amount invested in Australian superannuation is now approximately $2.6 trillion. And last year, Australia edged out the Canadian pension scheme to become the fourth largest pool of retirement savings in the world. To put this in perspective, the Australian superannuation assets comprise nearly 78% of managed funds in Australia and are more than half the size of total assets in Australian banks. Another illustration of the sheer quantum of these funds is the ratio of pension funds to GDP, which stands at 138%. Every year, the flow of funds into superannuation is increasing. Cbus alone has $2 billion to invest this year. Australian superannuation as a whole is expected to double in size by 2025. And we know that superannuation has repeatedly outstripped predictions about its growth. We simply cannot predict the full impact of the Australian superannuation industry over the next decade with certainty, although this is partly my job to talk about today. Today I want to give some insight into the trends for the industry, focusing on infrastructure and investment, and I wish to reflect on two related themes that I see emerging. First, how the remarkable cash flows in superannuation are driving both innovation and in Australia in terms of infrastructure delivery. Secondly, the need to minimise waste through costs from intermediaries in projects and in the investment process. So let's take a look at the cash flowing from superannuation into the infrastructure sector. On average, 5% of the portfolios of Australian superannuation funds are committed to infrastructure, either through debt or equity. If superannuation assets in Australia doubles by 2025, even at current proportions, that would equate to $130 billion flowing from superannuation into the infrastructure sector, either in Australia or the rest of the world. Of our current $45 billion funds under management, Cbus has around $4.5 billion in infrastructure. If Cbus's allocation of 10% in funds under management in infrastructure were reflected across the whole industry, this would mean around $260 billion of retirement savings flowing from superannuation to support infrastructure by 2025. The International Monetary Fund estimates that GDP multipliers from infrastructure investments can range as high as $1.80 for every dollar invested. The impact of that spend on employment is also staggering. The ABS estimated that the multiplier effect for construction spend resulted in 9 additional jobs per $1 million of spending, and as many as 37 jobs from indirect effects. But if we conservatively use 9 jobs, the jobs attributable to superannuation investment in infrastructure could be as much as 2.3 million by 2025. Even this massive amount of capital will not keep up with demand for finance for infrastructure, which has been estimated to be between 455 and 770 billion. The federal government alone, as you have heard, has announced a capital spend of 75 billion over the next decade. So what does all this mean for infrastructure and superannuation's participation in it? What I'm going to highlight here is an evolving relationship between superannuation. First of all, I think given the size and the scale that we're talking about here, there is a changing investment appetite for superannuation funds to participate. When fund balances were smaller, investment, in particular in greenfield projects, was not realistic, both in terms of the capabilities that you needed to have to be able to assess and direct that capital, but also the upfront costs for a small fund to participate in greenfields projects were prohibitive. With growth in funds under management, many superannuation funds are now building internal teams. Cbus is one of them, with the expertise that means that greenfield projects are a real consideration and a real possibility because we're able to take that evaluation process internally. For Cbus, our development experience and track record through Cbus Property means directly investing in infrastructure is the next logical step for us. While we are never in the business of taking unreasonable risks, we now have the opportunity to participate in investment opportunities where being patient and forward-looking investors with experience in managing capital flows and cash yields is an advantage that represents a benefit to our members. With continuing growth in infrastructure projects and the emerging challenges to industry capacity, we need to be more selective about the investments that we see and look for innovation in the opportunities in terms of how we identify them. We're focused on strong risk-adjusted returns, a diverse mix of quality assets spread across greenfields and brownfield assets, as well as relationships that provide priority access to valuable deal pipelines. The investment landscape is also expanding. The last decade has seen superannuation investment in many major PPP projects and government asset sales in the country. These include examples such as the Sydney International Convention, Exhibition and Entertainment Precinct, Queensland Motorways, and in our case, we have a direct investment in the Port of Botany and Port Kembla, and we continue to expect this trend to go on in the future. Superannuation funds will have a greater appetite to participate across the project lifetime, potentially as a developer or a financier, a direct owner on the equity side, and even being active as part of the operations. And we will create opportunities for us to decide where we want to be in that. We may like to be involved in all, we may select to be only a part. Superannuation funds are well positioned to be a debt provider to infrastructure with an increased appetite for patient longer-term project financing and investments extending beyond the traditional asset class boundaries and the limitations of traditional bank financing. The emerging capacity challenges facing the industry in Australia also set the stage for superannuation funds to play a role in facilitating partnerships between local and international equity participants, with a sensitivity to our local contractors' jobs and conditions, which is unique. A recent example is our investment in Bright Energy Investments, which sees Cbus alongside the Dutch Infrastructure Fund, hold an 80.1% equity interest in a portfolio of wind and solar renewable generation assets in Western Australia, which will create 200 new construction jobs. One of the things that is quite interesting for us about this new investment is it's not just an investment in two projects, but it creates an opportunity for us to see a pipeline of new projects in a far more efficient way than if we were to go through an ongoing bid process. And we're comforted that Synergy, who is also the operator and the takeout entity, is also an equity investor in this arrangement. I think more of those type of arrangements where we have both equity and also other participants in a longer term type of opportunity is I think one of the ways ahead. In fact, we see Cbus occupying a unique position in the superannuation, property and infrastructure nexus. The three overarching principles of our investment strategy is to focus on the advantage that we have as being a long-term investor with well-known and strong cash flows, to be not limited to investing based on narrow definitions of asset classes. We are investing in a total portfolio for our members. They get a mixture of returns, and we should have the capacity to look at complex and interesting investments that don't need to be broken up into those traditionally predefined spaces. And the last thing that we think that really is a strong advantage is our real focus and connection with investments in the real economy. This connection it goes with the experience that we have through Cbus Property, but also the support and the insights that we have from our sponsoring organisations. Now, some funds may not be well placed to assess an infrastructure asset as an investment opportunity, whether it's found. Sorry, some funds will not be as well placed in assessing infrastructure opportunities compared to us because we have this natural advantage. We invest in infrastructure and property from an investment perspective because it has been one of the outstanding success stories in the Australian economy, and because it is where our members and employers work. We want to support them and create a virtuous circle with our investments. That is strong returns, it is jobs for our industry, and it is economic value for our country. Our infrastructure journey will continue at Cbus, and we are confident that it is contributing to our strong performance. Our growth option continues to achieve above its return objective, which is 3.25% above inflation. And this year we are on track for another double-digit return, which I feel is very impressive in absolute terms, but it's also very strong compared to other funds. Our wholly owned subsidiary, Cbus Property, which contributes to local economies through high-quality property developments, achieved a return of 24.3% last year compared to an industry average of 12%. This is the third year in succession that it has achieved returns in excess of 20%, and it has generated returns averaging around 16% per year since inception. I've talked about the quantum of funds and its impact on driving innovation in infrastructure finance. I'd like to talk about one of the challenges of this growth. First of all, I want to make the point that uncertainty around taxation and superannuation legislation can act as a disincentive for funds to increase investment. A stable investment environment with a predictable pipeline allows funds to be available and maximises our chance for increasing returns for our members. At Cbus, members are the heart of everything that we do, and it's important that we retain one of the strengths of our super system, the ability for funds with the certainty of default cash flows to make long-term investments to benefit both members and the economy. As an industry, when it grows, it has the opportunity to benefit from economies of scale, but it also faces challenges in double handling and more entities being involved in any single transaction. Infrastructure is no different. We have seen the growth of financiers who are employing other financiers, who may be employing consultants, who may be employing other experts, with sometimes multiple carries on the same transaction. We recognise that it's in everyone's interest to minimise waste in infrastructure delivery from conception of the project through to the delivery and operation. Both the industry and government are well aware of the procurement costs in infrastructure, which come out not only of the public pocket, but also come out as a cost to returns for investors like our members, and impacts negatively on unsuccessful bidders. We congratulate the efforts in government, particularly state governments, to standardise contract documentation where possible and to take a more active role in minimising procurement expenses. There is always more that we can do, though. At Cbus, we have looked critically at our own supply chain and how many clips of the ticket are being taken out of people's savings along the way. We have tried to identify how we can drive better outcomes for our members and stop paying for participants in our industry that add little value. For Cbus, that means building internal capacity in investments, advice, digital and direct servicing of members and employers, and we're continuing to transition Cbus's investment model to a hybrid approach where our internal capabilities work alongside existing external funds managers. We expect to manage at least 35% of our assets internally by 2022 and to lower our investment costs by around 18 basis points. On our best estimates, this translates to reducing costs to members by over $100 million per year. So this is money that's going straight into their retirement savings. Our new internal capability will bring us closer to the market, improve our insights, and give us better access to deals. For example, through relationships that we may establish directly with corporates or indirectly in terms of positioning ourselves to identify unlisted transactions. Our capacity also enables us to participate directly at more stages of opportunity, limiting additional financiers and arrangers costs which are associated along the way. With internal team costs largely fixed, once teams are established, as we grow, our costs become even more competitive than investing in the old way where we outsource. This is because fund manager fees, fund managers charge by taking a percentage of assets under management. Irrespective of value added, it could be the market that's driving that, they still get more. So in summary, maximising the positive impact of finance and infrastructure and minimising waste for the future will be two of the key challenges facing our industries. I welcome the Master Builder's ongoing contribution to a thoughtful debate on these issues, and we look forward to continuing to work closely with the Master Builders and its members. I thank the Master Builders for the opportunity to have this discussion, and I'm sure the views expressed here today will be a valuable part of the national industry debate. Thank you.